Why do you believe that thing you believe? No, I'm serious. Think about it. Right now in your head, you've got an opinion. Maybe it's about politics. Maybe it's about how smart you are. Maybe it's about whether that person really likes you and you're sure about it. You feel certain, but here's the thing. How do you know you didn't just make it up? How do you know your brain isn't playing a trick on you this very moment, convincing you of something that isn't true? I'm Richard Feynman. I've spent my life trying to figure out how the world works, not by looking at the labels we put on things, but by looking at the things themselves. Today I want to talk to you about the underlying machinery of what's happening here, why it's so fascinating, and how we can understand it by breaking it down into its simplest, most fundamental parts. If what I'm about to share with you genuinely makes you think differently, do me a favor, hit subscribe right now wherever you are, whether you're watching from New York or Lahore, from London or Lagos, from some quiet corner of the world where curious minds still ask hard questions. This channel is for you. Hit the like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. It matters more than you know. Now, let's get into it. I've spent my whole life in physics, and you might think physics is safe, numbers, equations, hard facts. But I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. Some of the biggest mistakes in the history of science weren't made by stupid people. They were made by brilliant people, Nobel Prize winners, the best minds in the world. And you know why? Because they wanted something to be true. They believed it so hard that they bent the world to fit their belief. And here's the terrifying part, they didn't know they were doing it. By the time we're done here today, you're going to understand how your own mind works against you. You're going to see the tricks it plays, and if you're lucky, if you really pay attention, you might learn how to catch yourself in the act of fooling yourself, because that is the hardest thing in the world to do. Let me tell you about the first principle. The most important thing I know. Ready? Here it is. You must not fool yourself. And you are the easiest person to fool. I'll say it again because it matters that much. You must not fool yourself. And you are the easiest person to fool, not other people, not con men or politicians or used car salesmen. You are your own easiest mark, your own best target. Your brain is running a con on you right now, and it's been doing it your whole life. Now, why should that be? Think about it from nature's perspective. Your brain didn't evolve to find the truth. It evolved to keep you alive long enough to have children. That's it. Truth was never the goal. Survival was the goal. And sometimes a little self-deception actually helps you survive. If you're slightly overconfident, you might take risks that pay off. If you believe you're more attractive than you are, you might approach a mate who turns out to like you. Nature doesn't care if you're accurate. Nature cares if you reproduce. But here's the problem. In science, in trying to understand the world, self-deception is fatal. It destroys everything. If you believe something because you want it to be true, you're not doing science anymore. You're doing something else, something dangerous, something I call cargo cult science. Let me tell you what I mean by that. In the South Pacific during the war, there were islands where the natives had never seen modern technology. Then suddenly American soldiers showed up. They built airstrips, control towers, and planes started landing with all kinds of wonderful things, food, tools, medicine, cargo. The natives watched this happen and thought, well, this is pretty good. We'd like that to keep happening. But then the war ended. The soldiers left. The planes stopped coming. So what did the natives do? They figured maybe they could make it happen again. They cleared areas to look like runways. They built wooden huts that looked like control towers. They carved headphones out of wood and wore them. They sat in their towers and waved their arms like they'd seen the controllers do. They did everything right. The form was perfect. It looked exactly like it was supposed to look. But the planes didn't land. See, they had the outward appearance of the thing without understanding what made it actually work. They didn't know about radio signals or navigation or the whole system of logistics that made those planes appear. They just copied what they could see, and copying what you can see isn't the same as understanding. Now, you might laugh at this. Wooden headphones, that's absurd. But I'm going to tell you something. There are scientists right now at major universities getting grants and publishing papers who are doing the same thing. They have the form of science without the substance. They have statistics and peer review and laboratory equipment. They write papers that look scientific, but the planes don't land. Their results don't replicate. Their theories don't predict anything new. And they don't even know they're doing it wrong. Why? Because they've fooled themselves. They've started believing something and then arranged all their work to prove what they already believe. That's not science. That's rationalization dressed up in a lab coat. Let me give you a real example from the history of physics. Robert Millikan was a brilliant man. He won the Nobel Prize. He did an experiment to measure the charge of an electron using tiny drops of oil. Very clever idea. He watched the drops fall through the air, then turned on an electric field to make them rise, and from that he could calculate how much charge each drop carried. He got an answer, and his answer was wrong. Just a little bit wrong, about 0.5% too low, because he used an incorrect value for the viscosity of air. That wasn't his fault. Nobody knew the right value at the time. But here's what keeps me up at night. After Millikan published his number, other people started measuring the electron's charge using different experiments and different methods. And if you plot all their results over time, something very strange happens. The values creep up little by little. One experimenter gets a number a bit higher than Millikan's. The next gets a number a bit higher than that. They keep creeping upward over years until they finally settle on the correct value, noticeably higher than what Millikan measured. Why didn't someone just immediately get the right answer? I'll tell you what was happening. Those scientists were fooling themselves. They'd measure their oil drops, do their calculations, and get a number. If the number was close to Millikan's, they'd say, good, that makes sense, and publish it. But if their number was way higher than Millikan's, they'd say, that's suspicious. Maybe I did something wrong. Let me check my equipment. Let me look for errors. And they'd find reasons to throw out the high numbers. They weren't cheating. They weren't lying. They genuinely believed they were being careful scientists. But they had a number in their heads, Millikan's number, and anything that disagreed with it too much seemed like a mistake. So they eliminated the very data that would have given them the right answer. This is what self-deception looks like in practice. Not villains twirling their mustaches and deliberately faking data, just ordinary people, good people, careful people who subtly tilted the playing field without even realizing they were doing it. And when you look at Millikan's own laboratory notebooks, there are comments in the margins published next to some measurements and something wrong next to others. Maybe he had good scientific reasons for those judgments. But maybe, just maybe, he was unconsciously selecting the data that gave him a cleaner result. We can't read his mind. We don't know for sure, but this is the danger. This is the game. Now I want you to notice something. You're running experiments all the time, too. You're testing ideas about the world constantly. Should I trust this person? Is this relationship working? Am I good at my job? Every day you're gathering evidence and drawing conclusions. And every day your brain is lying to you about what that evidence means. Here's a simple example. You buy a new car. Suddenly, everywhere you look, you see other people driving the same car. You think, wow, this must be a really popular model. But those cars were always there. You just didn't notice them before because they weren't relevant to you. Now that you own one, your brain highlights every matching car and filters out the rest. This is called the frequency illusion, and it's harmless with cars. But the same mechanism affects everything you think about. Or consider this. You read a horoscope that says you're going to have challenges with communication this week. And what happens? During the week, you notice every miscommunication, every awkward conversation, and you think, wow, that horoscope was right. But you don't notice all the conversations that went perfectly. Your brain selectively remembers the hits and forgets the misses. This is how psychics work, by the way. They make vague predictions that could apply to anyone, and your brain does all the work of making them seem specific and accurate. You fool yourself into thinking they have special powers. This pattern has a name. Scientists call it confirmation bias. Once you believe something, you notice the evidence that supports it, and you ignore or discount the evidence that contradicts it. You're not doing this on purpose. You don't know you're doing it. Your brain is just naturally organized to protect its beliefs from attack. It's a kind of a dance, your desires leading, reality trying to follow. Here's what I've learned about myself. When I'm working on a physics problem and I get stuck, there's always a temptation to fudge a little bit, to say, well, it's probably okay to assume this, or that term is probably small enough to ignore. And sometimes those assumptions are valid, but sometimes they're just a way to make the answer come out the way I want it to. The hardest thing in the world is to catch yourself doing this because it feels like honest reasoning. It feels like you're being practical, making reasonable approximations. But underneath, there might be wishful thinking, pushing you toward a particular result. Now, here's a misconception I want to knock down. People often think that smart people are less likely to fool themselves, that intelligence protects you from self-deception, that if you just think hard enough, you'll see through your own biases. This is wrong. In fact, it might be exactly backwards. Smart people are often better at fooling themselves. Why? Because they're better at constructing plausible-sounding reasons for what they want to believe. Their intelligence becomes a weapon they use against themselves. A simple person who believes something silly can't defend it very well. But a brilliant person who believes something silly can tie you in knots. I've seen this many times in physics. Very smart people who've committed to a wrong idea and use their considerable brains to defend it rather than to question it. The smarter they are, the longer it takes them to see their mistake because they keep finding clever reasons why they must be right. What you need isn't a higher IQ. What you need is intellectual honesty, the willingness to hold your beliefs loosely enough that evidence can actually change them. And that's a character trait, not an IQ score. So what can we actually do about all this? How do we protect ourselves from our own minds? The first step is awareness. Just knowing that self-deception exists makes you less vulnerable to it. Before you decide whether to believe something, try to imagine how you'd react if the opposite were true. If someone showed you evidence against your position, would you take it seriously? Would you change your mind? Or would you immediately start looking for reasons to reject it? If the answer is that you'd look for reasons to reject contrary evidence, that's a warning sign. That tells you something important. The second step is to actively seek out disagreement. Find people who think differently than you do and really listen to them, not to argue, but to understand. You need critics. You need skeptics. You need someone willing to tell you you're wrong. That discomfort you feel when someone challenges your ideas, that's the feeling of your beliefs being tested, and beliefs that can't survive testing aren't worth holding. I try to seek out the strongest arguments against my positions, not the weak ones that are easy to knock down, but the best, most thoughtful objections. The third step is to make predictions before you look at the evidence. Write down what you expect to find, then check how well your expectations matched reality. Writing it down beforehand prevents you from rewriting your memory later, prevents you from saying, oh yes, I expected that all along.
The fourth step is genuine humility, not false modesty, but real uncertainty about what you know. Accept that you might be wrong about things you feel absolutely certain about. Accept that smart people before you have been confidently wrong about many things. Accept that you're probably wrong about something important right now, even though you don't know what it is. I have approximate answers and possible beliefs with different degrees of certainty about different things. I'm not absolutely sure of anything. And you know what? I think that's exactly the right way to be. Early in my career, I believed something quite strongly about how a certain physical process worked. I had good reasons. The mathematics seemed to support it. Other people agreed with me. I was pretty sure I was right. Then I met someone who disagreed. At first I thought he was confused. I tried to explain why he was wrong, but he kept pushing back, kept asking questions I couldn't quite answer. And eventually, after real struggle, I realized he was right and I was wrong. That was painful. I'd been publicly advocating for the wrong position. I'd written papers about it, but you know what? After the initial sting, I felt lighter. I felt free. I wasn't carrying around the burden of defending something wrong anymore. I could think more clearly because I wasn't twisting my thoughts to protect a mistake. Changing my mind was actually liberating. There's something beautiful about not knowing. I can live with doubt and uncertainty, and I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers which might be wrong. Most people are afraid of uncertainty. They want firm ground. They want to be sure. But certainty is a trap. When you're certain, you stop looking. You stop questioning. You stop learning. The moment you become absolutely sure of something is the moment you become most vulnerable to being wrong about it. Doubt is not weakness. Doubt is strength. It takes courage to say, I don't know. It takes even more courage to say, I was wrong. But that's how you get closer to the truth.
Think about it this way. The world is a great chess game being played by the gods, and our job is to figure out the rules. We can't just watch a few moves and declare we understand everything. We have to keep watching, keep testing our theories against what we actually observe, and stay humble enough to revise them when nature tells us we've got it wrong. That's the pleasure of finding things out, not the comfort of certainty, the thrill of discovery. Science at its best is a way of thinking that embraces doubt. It says, I believe this, but I might be wrong. Here are the reasons I might be wrong. Here is how we could find out. Let's look and see. That's not a perfect shield against self-deception. Scientists fool themselves all the time, as I've told you. But it's the best method we have. It's the only method that has let us fly to the moon, cure diseases, understand atoms, and see to the edge of the universe. And it all comes back to that first principle. You must not fool yourself. And you are the easiest person to fool. So be careful. Be honest. Be humble. Question everything, especially yourself. And remember, the planes only land when you actually understand how to call them down. Not when you're just going through the motions. Not when you're wearing wooden headphones and waving your arms at the sky. I'd love to hear from you. Tell me about a time you caught yourself believing something just because you wanted it to be true. What happened when you realized it? Drop it in the comments. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a very good time. See you in the next one.